Russian avant-garde. The Russian avant-garde was a dynamic and influential art movement that emerged in the early 20th century, particularly around the time of the Russian Revolution in 1917. This movement encompassed various forms of artistic expression, including visual arts, literature, theater, and graphic design. The avant-garde artists sought to break away from traditional artistic conventions and explore innovative ways of representing the rapidly changing social and political landscape of Russia. The Russian avant-garde was closely tied to the revolutionary spirit of the time. Many artists believed in the power of art to contribute to societal change and the construction of a new, utopian society. This connection between art and revolution is evident in manifestos, writings, and the choice of subject matter in their works. Key features of the Russian avant-garde in the early 1920s include Suprematism, developed by artist Kazimir Malevich. Suprematism focused on the use of basic geometric shapes like squares and circles. Suprematist artists believed in the supremacy of pure artistic feeling over the depiction of objects from the real world. Constructivism. This was a significant movement within the Russian avant-garde, particularly in the visual arts and architecture. Artists such as Vladimir Tatlin and Alexander Rodchenko played crucial roles in the development of constructivism. The movement emphasized the use of geometric shapes, industrial materials, and a focus on functionality. Constructivist artists aimed to create art that served a social or political purpose. Futurism. Russian Futurism was another influential movement within the avant-garde, influenced by the broader European futurist movement. Russian futurists, such as Velimir Klebnikov and Vladimir Mayakovsky, were poets who experimented with language and form, creating a dynamic and often chaotic style that reflected the energy of the time. Notable artists of Russian Futurism were also the painter, illustrator and set designer Natalia Goncharova, the painter Mikhail Layanov and the poet and painter David Berlyuk. Experimental theater. The Russian avant-garde extended its influence to the realm of theater. Directors like Vsevolod Meyerhold and artists like Kazimir Malevich and Lyubov Popova collaborated on innovative set designs and performances that aimed to break down the barriers between the audience and the stage. Literature. The avant-garde also had a significant impact on Russian literature. Writers like Vladimir Mayakovsky and Velimir Klebnikov experimented with language, typography, and form in their poetry. Mayakovsky, for example, was known for his dynamic and politically charged verses. The Russian avant-garde was not only an artistic movement but also a reflection of the political and social upheavals of the time. It was a period of experimentation, idealism, and a belief in the transformative power of art. However, as the political climate in the Soviet Union shifted, many avant-garde artists faced challenges and suppression under the more conservative artistic policies that emerged in the later 1920s and 1930s. Suprematism. Suprematism is an art movement that originated in Russia in the early 20th century, with its peak during the years 1915 to 1922. It was founded by the artist Kazimir Malevich, who introduced the term in 1915 to describe the style of abstract art he developed. Suprematism is characterized by its focus on geometric shapes, particularly the use of basic forms such as squares, circles, and rectangles, as well as a limited color palette, often dominated by white, black, and primary colors. Key characteristics of suprematism include Geometric abstraction. Suprematist artists sought to create a pure, non-representational form of art by using simple geometric shapes and reducing art to its most basic elements. Use of color. While the early suprematist works were often limited to a stark black and white palette, Malevich later introduced primary colors to his compositions. These colors were used in a flat, non-representational manner. Non-objective art. Suprematism is considered a form of non-objective art, meaning that it does not depict objects from the visible world. Instead, it focuses on the expression of pure feeling and emotion through abstract forms. Spiritual element. Malevich believed that suprematism could convey a sense of spiritual transcendence and that the geometric forms he employed represented a higher, non-material reality. One of Malevich's most famous works is the painting titled Black Square, which is often considered an iconic representation of suprematism. The black square on a white background represents a rejection of representational art and a move toward pure abstraction. Malevich created a series of paintings called suprematist compositions, where he continued to explore the use of geometric forms and a reduced color palette. These artworks often featured squares, circles, and rectangles arranged in dynamic and balanced compositions. Suprematism had a significant impact on the development of Constructivism, another art movement in Russia. Constructivist artists, such as Vladimir Tatlin, embraced geometric abstraction and functional design principles, often influenced by suprematist ideas. Despite its relatively short-lived presence, suprematism left a lasting legacy on the art world. The movement's emphasis on abstraction, geometric shapes, and the spiritual in art influenced subsequent movements such as abstract expressionism, minimalism, and even contemporary art. Kazimir Malevich. Kazimir Malevich, 1879–1935, was a Russian avant-garde artist and a key figure in the development of abstract art. He was born in Kiev, Ukraine, then part of the Russian Empire. Kazimir Malevich studied at the Moscow School of Painting, Sculpture, and Architecture from 1904 to 1910. His early works were influenced by various artistic movements, including Impressionism and Fauvism. In the years leading up to World War I, Malevich's style evolved, and he became associated with Cubism and Futurism. He was inspired by the dynamic energy of modern life and began incorporating geometric shapes and angular forms into his paintings. Malevich was the artist who led Cubism to absolute geometric abstraction. Malevich is best known for founding the art movement called Suprematism in 1915. Suprematism derived its name from the Latin term supremus, signifying the highest or excellent. This movement rejected representational forms in favor of geometric abstraction, emphasizing the purity of form and color. Malevich believed that art should transcend the material world and connect with the spiritual. Suprematism, as articulated by Malevich, is characterized as the supremacy of pure emotion in creative art. The square, deemed the most fundamental and supreme artistic element according to suprematism, became the primary means through which this supremacy found expression. Malevich's most famous work is Black Square, which is considered one of the iconic works of abstract art. Beyond the square, Malevich used various shapes to convey intricate emotional states. Thus, the square was followed by the incorporation of the circle, the triangle, juxtaposed identical squares, and unequally sized squares balanced by color distinctions. As of 1916, He began to include curved shapes, lines, and a kind of a third dimension, particularly by allowing the edges of his planes to blend in with the depth. Notably, Malevich introduced a limited yet impactful color palette of black, red, gray, and white, encompassing not only primary and complementary tones but also mixed hues. It's essential to note that Malevich was a devout believer of the Christian religion, a theme reflected in his paintings wherein figures were often depicted to form a cross, adding a layer of spiritual significance to his avant-garde contributions. Malevich initially welcomed the Russian Revolution in 1917, believing it would lead to a new, more spiritual society. However, his avant-garde ideas fell out of favor as the Soviet government increasingly embraced socialist realism. Malevich faced criticism, and his work was suppressed. In the 1920s, Malevich distanced himself from Suprematism and returned to more traditional forms of art. Malevich's suprematist ideas had a lasting impact on the development of abstract and minimalist art. Artists such as Piet Mondrian and Theo van Doesburg, founders of the De Stijl movement, were influenced by Malevich's geometric abstraction. Additionally, Malevich's ideas resonate with later movements like minimalism and conceptual art. Kazimir Malevich. Black Square. Created in 1915, the artwork currently resides in the Tretyakov Gallery in Moscow. Black Square is considered one of the most iconic and radical works in the history of modern art. The painting features a simple black square on a white background. It is a geometric abstraction that represents a departure from representational art and a move towards pure abstraction. Malevich referred to this style as Suprematism, a term he coined to describe art that goes beyond the constraints of the visual world and aims for the supremacy of pure artistic feeling and perception. Malevich saw the black square not just as a geometric form but as a symbol of the void or the infinite. He believed that by reducing art to its most basic elements, he could tap into a higher, spiritual realm of creativity and consciousness. The square, for Malevich, represented a departure from the material world and a gateway to a new, non-representational reality. The painting is also seen as a political statement, reflecting the revolutionary spirit of the time. Malevich was part of the Russian avant-garde during the tumultuous period leading up to the Russian Revolution of 1917. Black Square has been interpreted as a radical break from artistic conventions, challenging the established norms of art and culture. Malevich created variations of the black square, such as black square and red square and black square on a white ground. These compositions further explored the relationship between geometric forms and colors within the suprematist framework. Malevich considered black square as the zero point of painting, signaling a break from the past and a new beginning for artistic expression. It marked a departure from representational art and traditional perspectives, symbolizing a new artistic language. Black square has become an iconic symbol of modern art. It is often reproduced and referenced in contemporary art and popular culture. The image has transcended its original context and has become a powerful emblem of the avant-garde and the quest for artistic purity. Kazimir Malevich. White on White. Painted in 1918, this renowned artwork can be found at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. This particular painting is considered an important piece in the development of abstract art. The painting is characterized by its simplicity and minimalism. It features a white square placed slightly off-center against a larger white square, set against a white background. Upon closer inspection, Malevich's innovation becomes evident as he presents two white squares in a distinct manner. Notably, the second white square isn't painted, instead, it is a canvas square. The composition is geometrically precise, and the use of a single color, white, emphasizes the purity and simplicity of the form. The white-on-white design suggests a sense of transcendence, creating a contemplative experience for the viewer. White-on-white is part of Malevich's series of paintings that he called Suprematist compositions. Suprematism was focused on the use of geometric shapes and a limited color palette to express pure, abstract forms. In these works, Malevich aimed to move away from representational art and traditional perspectives, seeking a more universal and spiritual language of art. The painting is often interpreted as an exploration of the transcendental and the infinite. The white square seems to hover within the larger square, suggesting a sense of weightlessness and calmness. Malevich's white-on-white remains an iconic work in the history of art. Its influence can be seen in the work of subsequent generations of artists exploring abstraction and minimalism. Kazimir Malevich. Suprematist composition, blue rectangle over the red beam. Created in 1916, this painting is part of a private collection. This particular painting is emblematic of Malevich's suprematist principles. The painting features a stark composition with a blue rectangle hovering above a red beam against a white background. The geometric forms are simple and devoid of any representational or figurative elements. The arrangement of shapes is dynamic, creating a sense of movement and tension within the canvas. The color palette is reduced to basic primary colors, emphasizing the purity and simplicity of form. The blue rectangle and red beam in this particular painting are symbolic elements that Malevich used to convey his spiritual and philosophical ideas. The color blue, for instance, was associated with the infinite and the spiritual, while the red beam represented the material world and earthly existence. One might interpret the piece as a dialogue between the spiritual, blue, and the material, red. Malevich's suprematist movement sought to move beyond representation and symbolism in art, aiming for a more spiritual and universal experience. The use of basic geometric shapes and primary colors in suprematist composition reflects the artist's belief in the universal power of form and color. The title of the painting itself is indicative of Malevich's interest in the supremacy of pure artistic elements. Malevich's compositions had a profound impact on the development of abstract art, influencing subsequent movements such as Constructivism and Minimalism. Suprematist composition, blue rectangle over the red beam, is considered a landmark work in the history of abstract art, and Malevich's suprematist movement had a profound influence on the development of modern and contemporary art. By reducing art to its fundamental elements, geometric shapes and colors, he sought to evoke emotions and thoughts beyond the material world. The painting, in particular, exemplifies Malevich's commitment to breaking free from representational constraints and aligns with broader avant-garde movements of the time, contributing to the evolution of artistic expression. Russian Constructivism. Russian Constructivism was an influential art and architectural movement that emerged in Russia during the early 20th century, particularly in the aftermath of the Russian Revolution of 1917. It was a part of the larger constructivist movement, which also had manifestations in other fields such as literature, graphic design, and industrial design. Russian constructivism is often associated with the avant-garde and is characterized by its emphasis on functionalism, geometric shapes, and the idea of art serving a social purpose. Russian constructivism emerged in the turbulent political and social climate following the Russian Revolution of 1917. The movement was closely tied to the ideals of the Bolshevik government and sought to create art and architecture that reflected the new socialist society. One of the fundamental principles of constructivism was the idea that art and architecture should have a practical, functional purpose. Constructivists rejected traditional, decorative forms in favor of designs that served a utilitarian or social function. Constructivist art often featured geometric shapes, bold lines, and a reduction of forms to their most basic elements. Artists like Kazimir Malevich, a key figure in the movement, explored non-representational art through his creation of Suprematism, an abstract style that focused on basic geometric shapes and a limited color palette. Constructivist artists and architects embraced industrial materials such as steel, glass, and concrete. They believed that these materials were more suited to the needs of a modern, industrialized society. In architecture, Vladimir Tatlin, a central figure in the Russian constructivist movement, had a significant impact on the design of buildings. His monument to the Third International, also known as Tatlin's Tower, was a groundbreaking architectural design that embodied the spirit of the movement. Although the tower was never constructed, it remains a symbol of avant-garde aspirations. L. Lissitzky was another influential artist associated with Russian constructivism. He contributed significantly to the movement through his work in graphic design, photography, and typography. Lissitzky's Proun series, a combination of painting and architecture, exemplified his exploration of abstract, geometric forms. Constructivism extended beyond traditional art forms to include agitational propaganda, agitprop, and applied arts. Artists and designers worked on posters, book covers, and other visual materials to communicate the ideals of the new socialist state. Constructivism had an impact beyond its borders. The emphasis on functionality, simplicity, and the use of industrial materials can be seen in the modernist architecture and design movements that followed. The movement's principles influenced artists and designers worldwide and contributed to the development of modernist movements in Europe and America. Vladimir Tatlin. Vladimir Tatlin, 1885–1953, was a prominent Russian avant-garde artist and architect, born in Kharkov, Ukraine, then part of the Russian Empire. He played a crucial role in the development of the Russian avant-garde movement during the early 20th century. Tatlin's contributions were not limited to a single artistic discipline. He was involved in painting, sculpture, and architectural design. Tatlin came from a working-class background, and his early exposure to art came through his father, a railway engineer who also made amateur art. Tatlin's early life was marked by a series of jobs, including icon painting and working in a factory. In 1902, he began formal art education at the Moscow School of Painting, Sculpture, and Architecture, where he studied until 1904. Tatlin's artistic influences evolved over time, ranging from symbolism to cubism and futurism. His exposure to European modern art movements during travels to Paris deeply impacted his work. Tatlin was particularly influenced by the ideas of Pablo Picasso and Georges Braque, as well as the Italian Futurists. Additionally, his engagement with Constructivism and the Russian Revolution profoundly shaped his artistic and ideological outlook. Tatlin's engagement with Italian Futurism, especially the ideas of Filippo Tommaso Marinetti, contributed to his interest in dynamic forms and the fusion of art and technology. The political and social upheavals in Russia, including the 1917 October Revolution, further fueled Tatlin's commitment to creating art that aligned with the new Soviet ideals. In the early 1910s, Tatlin created a series of paintings that combined elements of Cubism and Futurism, marking his departure from traditional artistic conventions. Tatlin is best known for his counter-reliefs, three-dimensional constructions that incorporated industrial materials such as iron, glass, and wood. These works sought to break the boundaries between art and life, reflecting the spirit of the Russian Revolution. One of Tatlin's most ambitious and famous works, this unrealized project was conceived as a monument for the Communist International. The tower, with its dynamic structure and intended use as a propaganda tool, became an iconic symbol of the avant-garde. Despite never being built, it remains a key representation of constructivist ideals. Tatlin also worked on various architectural projects that aim to integrate art and technology, aligning with the principles of constructivism. Vladimir Tatlin's contributions to the avant-garde movement, particularly constructivism, had a lasting impact on the course of modern art and architecture. His ideas and designs continued to be influential, and his legacy showcases the innovative spirit of the early 20th century Russian avant-garde. Vladimir Tatlin. The Fishmonger. The painting, created in 1911, is currently housed at the Tretyakov Gallery, Moscow, Russia. Vladimir Tatlin was primarily known for his architectural and sculptural work, particularly Monument to the Third International, also called Tatlin's Tower. However, The Fishmonger is considered one of Tatlin's early paintings, created before he fully embraced constructivism. The artwork reflects influences from Cubism and Russian Futurism, which were gaining traction in Russia at the time. Tatlin was exposed to Cubism, especially through Picasso's work, which he studied during a visit to Paris in 1913. His early paintings, including The Fishmonger, show an interest in fragmented forms, dynamic compositions, and abstracted figures. As the title suggests, it portrays a fishmonger holding a fish in his hands, likely set in a marketplace. Behind him, a stall displays a freshly cut fish, reinforcing the scene's connection to daily trade and labor. Given the general aesthetic of his early works, the painting features earthy tones, sharp angles, and overlapping planes, emphasizing movement and structure. The Fishmonger is significant because it represents Tatlin's transitional phase, moving away from traditional figurative painting toward the abstract and industrial aesthetics that defined his later constructivist works. Vladimir Tatlin. Corner counter-relief. Tatlin created corner counter-relief during a pivotal period in Russian art history, when artists were moving away from representational painting and exploring new forms that engaged with space, materials, and modern industry. This work is part of his larger series of counter-reliefs, which he developed between 1914 and 1917. The composition is currently housed in the State Russian Museum, St. Petersburg. At the time, Tatlin was deeply influenced by Cubism and Futurism, having visited Paris in 1913, where he studied Picasso's constructed sculptures. The artist incorporated the industrial and functionalist spirit of post-revolutionary Russia into his work, rather than adopting Western artistic trends. Corner counter-relief is significant because it challenged traditional ideas of sculpture. Instead of being a freestanding object placed on a pedestal, it was designed to be suspended in a corner, engaging directly with the architecture of the space. This radical innovation rejected the traditional separation between art and environment, emphasizing movement, dynamism, and spatial integration. Unlike traditional sculptures made of bronze or stone, corner counter-relief consists of industrial materials such as metal, copper, iron, or steel wires, wood and rope. These materials were arranged in a way that created tension and balance, with the wires stretched diagonally across the space, interacting dynamically with the corner where it was installed. The composition features intersecting planes, taut lines, and suspended forms, emphasizing movement and structural harmony. The term counter-relief suggests that the work was intended as a response, or counter, to traditional relief sculptures, which were typically attached to flat surfaces like walls. Tatlin's counter-reliefs projected into space, making them interactive and engaging. The artwork was not just an artistic experiment, it was a radical statement about the role of art in society. It aligned with the principles of Constructivism, a movement that emerged after the Russian Revolution, which sought to merge art with industrial production and practical design. The composition is purely non-representational, focusing on real materials and their physical properties rather than imitating nature or narrative themes. Unlike traditional paintings or sculptures that exist as separate objects, this piece is fully integrated into its environment, reflecting a new way of thinking about art. By using everyday industrial materials, Tatlin emphasized function and structure over aesthetic decoration, advocating for the idea that art should be useful and embedded in daily life. Corner counter-relief was a foundational work in the development of modern sculpture, influencing generations of artists, including constructivist artists like Alexander Rodchenko and El Lissitzky, who further explored the relationship between art, technology, and space. Minimalist and conceptual artists in the 20th century, who embraced Tatlin's emphasis on materials, structure, and site-specific installation. Modern architecture and design, which absorbed Tatlin's ideas about integrating form, function, and industrial materials. Although many of Tatlin's original counter-reliefs were lost or destroyed, their impact endures in contemporary art and architecture. Vladimir Tatlin's corner counter-relief is one of the most innovative and influential works of early 20th century avant-garde art. By rejecting traditional sculptural forms and embracing industrial materials, Tatlin reimagined the role of art in relation to space, movement, and modern technology. His work laid the groundwork for constructivism and continues to inspire artists and architects today. Vladimir Tatlin. Monument to the Third International. The Monument to the Third International is a significant and visionary work of art designed by Russian artist Vladimir Tatlin in the early 20th century. Tatlin was a prominent figure in the Russian avant-garde movement, and this particular project is considered one of the most iconic and ambitious in the history of modern art. Tatlin created the monument in 1919 to 1920, during the aftermath of the Russian Revolution of 1917. The monument was intended to be a symbol of the new Soviet state and its revolutionary ideals. Tatlin's design was a colossal and dynamic structure that combined elements of architecture and sculpture, reflecting the spirit of the time and the aspirations of the emerging Soviet regime. The monument was designed to be a towering structure, reaching a height of over 1,300 feet, 400 meters. It was meant to be taller than the Eiffel Tower and the Empire State Building. The main components of the monument included a spiraling iron framework with three geometric shapes: a cube, a pyramid, and a cylinder. These elements were intended to symbolize different aspects of the communist ideology. The rotating sections of the tower were meant to complete a full rotation in different time intervals, with the cube rotating annually, the pyramid monthly, and the cylinder daily. The cube was designed to house the administrative offices of the Communist International, representing stability and long-term planning. The pyramid was meant to serve as a space for meetings and conferences, symbolizing the revolutionary fervor and dynamic nature of the movement. The cylinder, rotating on a daily basis, was intended to house a radio station and a newspaper office, featuring a continuous helix with news and images projected onto its surface. Tatlin proposed the use of modern materials, primarily iron and glass. The iron structure was to be a framework supporting the various rotating elements, while glass was intended to cover the surfaces, providing transparency and a sense of lightness. The design aligned with the ideals of the Russian Revolution and the emerging Soviet state. The combination of geometric shapes and the dynamic movement of the rotating elements was meant to represent the transition from the old order to the new socialist society. However, due to a combination of technical challenges, financial constraints, and changing political priorities, the monument was never constructed on the scale envisioned by Tatlin. The model and plans for the monument exist, but only smaller scale models and reconstructions have been created to provide a sense of what the completed structure might have looked like. Nowadays, there are models of the tower at the Modern Museum in Stockholm, Sweden, at Tretyakov Gallery in Moscow, and at the National Museum of Modern Art at the Centre Georges Pompidou in Paris. Despite its unrealized status, the monument to the Third International remains a symbol of the utopian aspirations of the early Soviet era and showcases the innovative thinking of the Russian avant-garde. The design has had a lasting impact on the history of art and architecture, influencing subsequent generations of artists and architects. Tatlin's vision continues to be studied and admired for its revolutionary spirit and its attempt to blend art, architecture, and ideology in a monumental expression of a new social order. Russian Futurism. Russian Futurism emerged in the early 20th century, around 1912, as a response to the rapid industrialization, technological advancements, and political upheavals in Russia. It was influenced by Italian Futurism, which glorified speed, technology, and modern life, but Russian futurists developed their own unique approach, rejecting Western traditions and seeking a distinctly Russian avant-garde style. The movement was first introduced in the A Slap in the Face of Public Taste, 1912, manifesto, which called for breaking away from classical artistic and literary conventions. Unlike their Italian counterparts, Russian futurists were more engaged with literary and poetic experimentation, incorporating Cyrillic typography, wordplay, and linguistic innovation in their works. Russian Futurism was highly experimental and included various forms of art such as painting, poetry, theater, music, and graphic design. Some key features include: in painting, dynamic composition and movement. Russian futurist painters aimed to depict the energy and speed of modern life, often using overlapping forms, fractured perspectives, and intersecting planes to create a sense of motion. Unlike the mechanical precision of Italian Futurism, Russian Futurism was more experimental, emphasizing chaos and fluidity rather than strict geometry. Geometric abstraction and Cubo-Futurism. Many Russian futurist painters combined cubism, fragmented forms, multiple perspectives, with futurism, motion, technology, leading to a style known as Cubo-Futurism. Objects and figures were broken down into geometric shapes, emphasizing form over realism. Bold use of color. Russian futurists used contrasting, vibrant colors to enhance the sense of energy and movement. Primary colors, red, yellow, blue, and stark contrasts, black and white, were common. Some artists, like Malevich, later reduced their color palette to near monochrome in suprematist works. Industrial and technological themes. Many paintings depicted factories, machines, urban life, and technological progress, reflecting the rise of modernity and revolution. Trains, airplanes, and workers were often painted in fragmented, abstracted forms, representing the dynamism of the new industrial age. Revolutionary and political messages. Many Russian futurist painters saw art as a tool for social and political change, especially after the Bolshevik Revolution, 1917. Futurist works often glorified the working class, progress, and a utopian vision of the future. Some later evolved into Constructivism, which emphasized functional, socially useful art. Notable artists of this period are Kazimir Malevich. Though later famous for Suprematism, Malevich started with Cubo-Futurist works. Natalia Goncharova is one of the few prominent female Russian futurists. She blended Futurism with Russian folk art. Mikhail Lyanov developed Rayonism, a Russian offshoot of Futurism that focused on light rays and energy rather than objects. David Berliuk is considered the father of Russian Futurism. His work combined bold colors, fragmented forms, and modern themes. Pavel Filanov, known for analytical art, he created highly detailed, fragmented paintings that resembled a fusion of Cubism and Futurism. Olga Rozanova, a major female Russian futurist, she was known for bold abstract compositions and a transition toward Suprematism. In poetry and literature, Russian futurist poets invented new, non-logical words, called zaum, breaking traditional syntax and grammar to create an abstract, emotional expression of language. Many futurists rejected past artistic traditions, especially classical literature, advocating for new artistic expressions that matched the fast-changing, revolutionary times. Main representatives of this new linguistic style are Vladimir Mayakovsky, one of the most famous futurist poets, known for his bold, dynamic poetry and revolutionary themes. Velimir Klebnikov, a key theorist of futurist poetry, creator of zaum, transrational language, and experimental poetry that broke linguistic rules. Alexei Krushelnik collaborated with Klebnikov, co-created zaum poetry, and used radical typographic layouts. In typography and graphic design, The Russian Futurists revolutionized graphic design with their radical use of fonts, layouts, and visual poetry, influencing Soviet propaganda art and constructivist posters. By the late 1920s, Russian Futurism declined as Stalinist policies favored socialist realism, which required art to depict the ideals of the Soviet state in a clear, representational manner. Many futurist artists were marginalized, persecuted, or forced to conform to state-approved art styles. However, Russian Futurism remains one of the most influential movements in avant-garde art and modernist literature. The movement inspired Dadaism, Surrealism, and later abstract expressionism in Western Europe and America. Kazimir Malevich. The Knife Grinder. The Knife Grinder, sometimes subtitled Principle of Glittering, is an important work by Kazimir Malevich, created between 1912 and 1913. The painting is part of the Yale University Art Gallery collection in the United States. The artwork is a striking example of Cubist Futurist style, reflecting Malevich's engagement with both French Cubism and Italian Futurism, which were significant influences on his early work before he fully developed Suprematism. It portrays a man with a mustache in a suit and hat, manually sharpening a knife in a grinding wheel. The figure is depicted repeatedly examining the knife, vigorously pedaling the machine again, hesitantly applying the blade and carefully pressing it to the sharpener in slow motion. The presence of green fragments around the grinder's face and hands suggests flying metal shavings. In the background, to the left, shelves and a table hold several vases, alongside what may be metal pipes, reinforcing the impression that the setting is a professional knife grinding workshop. On the right, indistinct grey shapes, possibly buildings, are visible, while a small staircase appears in the lower right corner. The figure is broken down into multiple overlapping planes and angular shapes, giving a sense of dynamism and mechanical movement. This approach is characteristic of Futurism, which aimed to depict motion and the energy of modern life. The artist also applied Cubist principles, reducing the figure and objects to faceted geometric forms that seem to shimmer or glitter, which is why the painting is sometimes associated with the principle of glittering. The metallic effect of the fragmented shapes enhances the idea of movement and reflects the rapid industrialization of the early 20th century. Malevich uses a dynamic color palette of blue, green, with shades of orange, yellow, crimson, brown, black, gray, and metallic silver. The contrasts between light and dark emphasize the machine-like quality of the figure and the rotational movement of the grinding wheel. The shimmering effect of the planes creates a sense of energy and vibration, reinforcing the idea of constant motion. The painting represents the mechanization of human labor, aligning with futurist ideals that glorified modern industry and speed. The man with the knife grinder appears almost fused with the machinery, suggesting a blurring of boundaries between man and technology, a common theme in avant-garde art of the time. The fractured, dynamic representation echoes the styles of Pablo Picasso, Georges Braque, and Umberto Boccioni. Malevich, however, adds his own interpretation, making the painting a unique fusion of these influences. The Knife Grinder is one of Malevich's most notable pre-suprematist works. It captures the energy of modern industrial life, blending Cubist fragmentation with futurist dynamism. The painting highlights his interest in movement, labor, and mechanization, while also serving as a stepping stone towards his later abstract innovations. Kazimir Malevich. Composition with Mona Lisa. Composition with Mona Lisa, 1914, is one of Kazimir Malevich's most intriguing pre-Suprematist works. The painting is currently housed in the State Russian Museum in St. Petersburg, Russia. It reflects his transition from Cubist futurist influences to his later development of Suprematism. This painting is a striking example of Russian avant-garde experimentation, blending collage, abstraction, and symbolic elements. In this artwork, Malevich deconstructs Leonardo da Vinci's Mona Lisa, a universally recognized masterpiece, and recontextualizes it within an avant-garde, modernist framework. The painting contains a printed reproduction of the Mona Lisa, which is partially obscured by bold geometric shapes and intersecting lines. Malevich deliberately disrupts the classical image, integrating Cubist and Futurist elements, including fragmented planes and dynamic lines, creating a sense of movement and energy. A collage-like effect, influenced by the synthetic cubism of Pablo Picasso and Georges Braque. By obscuring da Vinci's Mona Lisa, Malevich symbolically rejects the Renaissance tradition and classical artistic norms, pushing towards a new, revolutionary artistic language. The geometric forms and textual elements hint at Malevich's upcoming transition into pure abstraction and suprematism. The painting features a muted color palette, dominated by browns, blacks, blues, grays, whites and pinks, which aligns with Cubist aesthetics. Sharp contrasts between dark and light areas emphasize the disjointed, mechanical nature of the composition. The bold black cross-like form in the center adds to the sense of disruption and structural breakdown. This painting marks Malevich's departure from Cubist futurist styles and hints at his move toward suprematism. The use of text and collage elements links it to Dadaism and Constructivism, both of which would emerge in the coming years. Composition with Mona Lisa is a bold, provocative work that encapsulates Malevich's shift away from traditional representation and his rejection of classical art in favor of radical abstraction. Natalia Goncharova. Cyclist. Natalia Goncharova's Cyclist, 1913, is a striking example of Russian Futurism, a movement that embraced the dynamism, speed, and mechanical energy of modern life. The painting is currently housed in the State Russian Museum, St. Petersburg, Russia. The artwork captures the rapid motion of a man riding a bicycle through the city, depicted in a fragmented, overlapping manner that suggests movement and time-lapse effects. This technique, inspired by Italian Futurism and Cubism, reflects Goncharova's interest in representing motion through successive visual elements. The cyclist is shown in profile, with his legs and arms appearing multiple times, creating a sense of continuous movement. The overlapping letters and numbers in the background evoke advertising posters, newspaper clippings, and shop signs, reinforcing the urban setting and the integration of text into visual art, something that became a hallmark of Russian Futurism and Constructivism. Instead of using traditional perspective, Goncharova flattens the image and fragments the background, creating a sense of compressed depth that adds to the energy of the composition. The cyclist, a symbol of progress and mobility, represents the fast-paced nature of urban life in early 20th century Russia. The painting glorifies mechanization and the human-machine relationship, aligning with futurist ideals that celebrated speed and technology. The integration of words, numbers, and images into the painting anticipates later avant-garde movements like Constructivism, where text and art became inseparable. Goncharova's Cyclist remains a key example of Russian Futurism and avant-garde experimentation. It showcases her ability to synthesize international artistic trends with her own innovative techniques, paving the way for later developments in constructivism and graphic design. The painting is now recognized as one of the defining works of Russian modernism. Mikhail Lyapunov. Glass. The painting, created in 1909, is currently housed at the Solomon Guggenheim Museum, New York. It is a significant work within the Russian avant-garde movement, particularly associated with Rayonism, a style pioneered by Lyapunov and Natalia Goncharova. The artwork reflects Lyapunov's transition from post-impressionism and fauvism toward Rayonism, an abstract style that sought to depict the dynamic interplay of light rays rather than elements themselves. It was crafted during a period when Russian artists were experimenting with Cubism, Futurism, and Orphism, all of which focused on fragmentation, movement, and the perception of reality beyond traditional forms. The composition presents a fragmented and multifaceted depiction of an everyday object, a drinking glass emphasizing transparency and the refraction of light. This approach aligns with Lyapunov's later theoretical writings, where he emphasized the reduction of form into rays of reflected light. The dynamic use of color and lines gives the impression that the glass is vibrating or glowing, a characteristic of Rayonism, which sought to capture the movement of light rays as they interact with objects. The composition is non-representational, meaning that the subject, a glass, is not realistically depicted but instead suggested through fragmented forms. Glass is a symbolic rejection of traditional, static realism in favor of abstraction and energy. The transparency of glass makes it an ideal subject for exploring how light bends, refracts, and scatters, aligning with Rayonist theories of vision and light rays. The work reflects an interest in multiple perspectives and movement, similar to analytical cubism, Picasso, Braque, and Futurism's fascination with speed and dynamism. Glass is one of the earliest examples of Rayonism, and contributed to the growing importance of everyday objects in painting, paving the way for later developments in Suprematism and Constructivism. The painting's abstract nature and focus on light dynamics were innovative for its time, contributing to the broader avant-garde movement in early 20th century art. David Berluke. Peasant Woman. The painting, created between 1910 to 1911, is currently housed in the National Museum Thyssen-Bornemisza in Madrid, Spain. It is a portrait that reflects the Ukrainian artist's experimental approach to painting. The work exemplifies neo-primitivism, a movement influenced by traditional Russian folk art, icons, and Lubok prints, but also incorporates elements of cubism and fauvism. The painting depicts a robust, strong peasant woman, a common theme in Berluke's works celebrating rural life and folk traditions. His use of bold colors and thick, impasto brushstrokes gives the painting a textured, almost sculptural quality. The figure is stylized, appearing with simplified forms and exaggerated proportions, similar to Russian folk art. The background consists of abstract or fragmented elements. Like many of his works, Peasant Woman likely represents the strength and resilience of the rural class, aligning with his fascination with folk culture and agrarian life. As a leader of the Russian avant-garde and a founder of Futurism in Russia, Berliuk frequently painted peasants, showcasing their rugged dignity and connection to the land. This work aligns with his pre-revolutionary focus on peasant life, before he left Russia in the early 1920s. It could be interpreted as a symbol of endurance, especially given the political and social upheavals in Russia at the time. Pavel Filanov. Formula of Spring. Pavel Filanov's Formula of Spring is a striking example of his distinctive analytical art style, which he called analytical realism. Created between 1927 and 1929, this work embodies Filanov's meticulous technique, where he built up intricate compositions through countless tiny brushstrokes, layering forms and colors to create an almost kaleidoscopic effect. The painting is housed in the Russian Museum in St. Petersburg, where many of his surviving works are preserved. The artwork features a dense and fragmented composition, filled with dynamic shapes and organic forms that seem to pulse with movement. Filanov often depicted nature in a way that blended abstraction with a deep sense of structure, and Formula of Spring appears to reflect the chaotic yet harmonious energy of seasonal renewal. Rather than presenting a literal depiction of spring, Filanov conveys its essence through a complex web of interwoven patterns, vibrant hues, and fluid forms. The color palette includes lively greens, yellows, reds, and blues, evoking the blossoming of life after winter's dormancy. The intricate layering creates a sense of continuous growth, transformation, and organic movement, aligning with Filanov's belief that art should mirror the structural processes of life itself. Filanov saw painting as a way to explore the hidden structures of existence. In Formula of Spring, he captures the concept of renewal, growth, and transformation, not just in nature but in a broader philosophical and cosmic sense. The painting reflects his deep interest in the rhythms of life and the interconnection between natural and human forces. As a leading figure of the Russian avant-garde, Filanov developed an approach that was distinct from the geometric abstraction of movements like Suprematism and Constructivism. His analytical realism sought to analyze and deconstruct forms, rebuilding them into intricate, almost microscopic detail. However, his avant-garde ideas did not align with the dominant Soviet ideology of socialist realism, leading to his marginalization. Many of his works, including Formula of Spring, were not widely exhibited during his lifetime. Today, Formula of Spring is recognized as a masterwork of Filanov's complex, highly detailed style and remains a testament to his unique vision within the broader avant-garde movement. Olga Rozanova. Green Stripe. The painting, created in 1917, is a key work of Russian avant-garde art, reflecting her innovative approach to color and abstraction. As a prominent figure in the Suprematist and Cubo-Futurist movements, Rozanova explored the expressive potential of color and geometric forms, beyond traditional representation. Today the artwork is housed in the Tretyakov Gallery in Moscow. Green Stripe features a bold, vertical green stripe as its central element, set against a background of muted colors. Rozanova's use of pure color fields and dynamic forms aligns with Suprematism, the movement founded by Kazimir Malevich, which emphasized the supremacy of pure artistic feeling over realistic representation. Unlike Malevich's strict geometric approach, however, Rozanova's works often have a more fluid and painterly quality, showing her unique interpretation of non-objective art. The composition likely reflects her theory that color itself could carry meaning independently of form, an idea she explored in her later works. The green stripe, standing out prominently, might symbolize energy, renewal, or contrast within the composition's balance of forces. Rozanova was deeply engaged with the avant-garde circles in Russia and contributed significantly to the development of abstract art. By 1917, she was moving toward a completely non-representational style, emphasizing color as the primary means of artistic expression. Unfortunately, Rozanova passed away prematurely in 1918, cutting short a career that could have further revolutionized abstract painting. Today, green stripe is considered a significant example of Rozanova's mature abstract style and remains an important piece in the study of early 20th century avant-garde art. Olga Rozanova. Non-objective composition. The painting, created in 1916, is a significant example of Rozanova's unique approach to suprematism, blending geometric abstraction with a sense of dynamic movement. Today, it is housed in the State Russian Museum in St. Petersburg. The artist moved away from Malevich's stark black and white contrasts and instead embraced bright, expressive hues that added an emotional and energetic quality to the painting. The interplay between these colors and the geometric forms creates a visual tension, giving the piece a sense of depth despite its abstract nature. Rozanova was deeply interested in the expressive power of color and believed it could communicate meaning independently of form. This is evident in the way the colors in non-objective composition seem to float and interact on the canvas, suggesting an almost musical quality. This idea aligns with the broader avant-garde interest in synesthesia, the blending of sensory experiences, particularly between visual art and music. While Malevich and his followers were moving toward a more austere, mathematical abstraction, Rozanova's work retained a sense of spontaneity and expressive freedom, setting her apart from her contemporaries. The composition showcases the artist's innovative spirit and role as a pioneering force in the development of pure abstraction. The painting reflects her vision of a new art, one that was free from representation and tied instead to the emotional and spiritual power of color and form.